Hi there. I'm Indira Samarasekara.
And I am Martha Piper, and we are so glad you are joining us today for our podcast, She's Got Nerve.
This podcast is based upon our book, Nerve, which we wrote several years ago to assist women who are leaders or who are aspiring to lead. We wanted to expand our focus on women leaders by interviewing extraordinary women and recording their unique and authentic personal stories about how they developed the nerve to become leaders in their respective environments. Building on our own experiences we wrote about in our book Nerve, we believe these stories will demonstrate how nerve is required to overcome many of the obstacles women leaders face.
You know, Indira, lots of people ask us how we landed on the idea of nerve. Why nerve? What we discovered as we reviewed our own experiences is that nerve is the personal attribute that is often missing in women, even in those who aspire to lead. You know, nerve to be true to yourself, nerve to take a path less traveled, nerve to go first, nerve to act decisively, nerve to redefine yourself. And yet, so often, the term nerve is used pejoratively when applied to women, such as the nerve of her, or she's got a lot of nerve. Our goal in this podcast is to slay this dragon, to turn it on its head, to describe nerve as a trait that is required to lead rather than an attribute that women are not entitled to exhibit.
So let's get right to it. What a treat it is today to have a conversation with Mary Sue Coleman, an internationally recognized biochemist who received a Bachelor of Arts in Chemistry from Grinnell College and a Ph.D. in biochemistry from the University of North Carolina. She was on the biochemistry faculty at the University of Kentucky for 19 years, then served as the 18th president of the University of Iowa from 1995 to 2002. In 2002, she was appointed the 13th president of the University of Michigan, the first and only woman to date to have served in that capacity. In January 2022, she returned to the U of M as interim president, replacing Mark Schlissel and remaining in that role until Santa Ono took office on October 2022. Time magazine ranked her as one of the 10 best American university presidents in 2009, citing her success in fundraising and her emphasis on research. She is an elected fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and along with many other honors and appointments, has served as president of the Association of American Universities. It would seem as if Mary Sue Coleman has done it all, making today's discussion especially unique and exciting. So let's get started.
Hi, Mary Sue. How wonderful it is to be able to connect with you, to hear your stories and learn more about what you are currently experiencing. Perhaps we should begin at the beginning. You were born in Kentucky and then moved to Georgia, where your father taught at what was then the Georgia State Teachers College, which I understand now is Georgia Southern University. In 1954, when you were 11 years old, the Supreme Court ruled, and what's amazing now, with a 9-0 unanimous decision, I don't think we've seen a unanimous decision on anything recently, that segregation in public schools was unconstitutional and hence illegal. This landmark decision, known as Brown versus Board of Education, created havoc in the public schools in the South. Your parents, fearing that the public schools might be closed, decided to leave Georgia and relocate to Iowa. My goodness, that was quite a change. Looking back on that experience, you have recollected that as a child, you did not see the segregation of schools as an issue. But as you matured, you began to understand the consequences and importance of the Brown decision. Could you share with us today how that experience of moving as a child from the South to the North to pursue an education changed your views on racism and equal opportunity? And do you think your parents' decision to seek the best education for you and your sisters played an instrumental role in your lifelong commitment to advancing education?
Thank you. Thank you, Indira and Martha, for inviting me to be part of this program. So I've reflected on that question a lot in all my life. And I think, well, I know that as an adult, I was really dismayed by my blindness to the corrosive effects of segregation, to the racism that was what was everywhere. We lived in a county in Georgia that was 60% African American. They had poor or non-existent schools for children, for Black children. And I was just unaware of that reality. But I was lucky because my parents, for many generations, had believed in the power of education. My parents were highly educated themselves. My grandfather was highly educated. My great-grandfather was highly educated. And so I came from an environment where education was simply expected and good education was expected. So while the move to Iowa was not instrumental in how I felt about it, because one of the surprises to me in Iowa is that racism is everywhere. It wasn't confined to the South. It was not as overt in Iowa, but it was still there. Both my two sisters and I, and again, I think moving to Iowa was very important for us because the public schools were ranked very, very highly. I also had the opportunity, because I came really interested in science as a child, that I was able to do science projects. I participated in national and international science fairs. I met students from all over the country and all over the world. And I think those experiences were probably more foundational for me in wanting to become an educator later in life.
That's really interesting, Mary Sue. When you say that racism is everywhere, I grew up in Ohio, considered to be a northern state. But I remember, and I grew up in the town that Toni Morrison grew up in. So I've read all of her novels, and her first novel is called The Bluest Eye.
Yeah.
And it takes place in my hometown. It takes place in Lorain, Ohio. And she describes Lorain, it's almost a fictitious city in the book, but it is my hometown.
Mm-hmm.
She describes it very clearly how in the mid-50s it was totally racist. I mean, we had almost separate beaches, on the lake. Even though it wasn't illegal, it was just a behavior that was expected. You either went to the white beach or the black beach. You didn't cross those lines. And like you, as a child, I didn't think about it. And we interviewed Drew Faust, and she grew up in Virginia. And in her book, Necessary Trouble, and she talks about this in the podcast, at 9 years old, she understood the issues around segregation of education, and she writes a letter to the president about it. Now, I look at that and think, what was I doing when I was 9 years old? I was doing nothing.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Such, growing up in Sri Lanka when all of this was going on, I was about totally ignorant, right?
Yeah.
Steeped in British colonial traditions, post-British. I mean, my parents grew up, of course, in the British colony. So, it's funny how you don't think about these things as a child. And of course, my country went through a civil war.
Sure.
Between two races who are largely equal, but there was, discrimination based on race and religions. I don't know. We humans seem to like tribes and perpetrate incredible atrocities on one another. It's hopefully someday will change. Let me get to further intriguing aspects of your life, and that is that you received an undergraduate chemistry education at a highly regarded private liberal arts college. Martha always tells me that I'm very ignorant about liberal arts colleges, and it's true, because we don't have them in Canada, and if they are there, they're very small, and certainly not where I grew up in Sri Lanka. Grinnell College, located in Grinnell, Iowa, is a 4-year residential college with approximately 1,700 undergraduate students and prides itself, as do all the private liberal arts colleges, in providing an outstanding undergraduate education through small classes and a focus on the liberal arts rather than a professional education such as engineering, law, or medicine. So, having spent your professional career now at large research universities, could you comment on the educational environment you experienced as an undergraduate at Grinnell? And what, from your perspective, are the differences between the undergraduate learning environment of a small liberal arts college versus that experience at a large public research university, such as the University of Iowa or the University of Michigan?
Well, first of all, my parents believed strongly in the power of a liberal education at the undergraduate level. Both my sisters and I went to liberal arts colleges. I went to Grinnell, as you said, and my two sisters went to Carleton College in Minnesota. I earned a BA in chemistry instead of a BS, a Bachelor of Science degree, because I wanted to be able to experience some other areas of study rather than focusing everything on chemistry. So it was really a deliberate choice. And I, of course, was very much influenced by my parents and what they thought would be the best foundational education for their 3 daughters. So one of the things that really happened to me during my freshman year, and it's why I'm so glad I took this path, is that I was exploring other areas of study and I discovered metalsmithing in the art department, that is, working with gold and silver in many different ways. I became a serious, actually, student in the art department. I was given unlimited studio time, and I worked under 2 mentors who were husband and wife team, but they were famous makers of fine pieces in using gold and silver. And that experience for me was really transformational in terms of discovering that I did have an artistic side, as well as a science brain side. And I just loved both of them. And when I went on to graduate work, biochemistry at Chapel Hill, one of the things I discovered about my liberal arts education, it had been fantastic preparation for graduate school in biochemistry, because graduate school was easy for me because I had been so well educated at the undergraduate level. I finished my Ph.D. in 4 years. I enjoyed that experience at Chapel Hill enormously. But the other thing that I learned at Chapel Hill, it's a Southern university, I learned about the growing then tremendous inequality in the society. And by that time, I was much more attuned to it than I was as a child. While I was an undergraduate, I met an exchange student at Grinnell who was from Lemoyne College. Now, Lemoyne in Tennessee, we would describe as an HBCU, a historically Black college or university. I got to be friends with her, and she told me when she was growing up in her town in Tennessee and even in college that she was not allowed as an African American to sit where anybody else could sit in a movie theater. They had to all sit in the balcony. I was so astonished by that, and I was so embarrassed by that revelation that I really thought, I have to start doing something about this. This is not right. And that was in 1964. So that wasn't so long ago. So when I got to Chapel Hill as both a graduate student and then later as a postdoctoral fellow for Mary Ellen Jones, who was deceased now, but a very, very distinguished biochemist. She was the first female faculty in science at Chapel Hill. That she and I, observing the lab assistants at Chapel Hill, and at least in the sciences that we were in, were all Black. They had the worst possible jobs as cleaning glassware or cleaning animal cages. They couldn't advance in the system. And so we took it upon ourselves, she and I, to start a little program after work to teach our lab assistants how to do measurement. That is, to go to the next level in their labs, because then if they could understand the systems that they were using, they could do all sorts of measurement. They were qualified to do something other than wash glassware and clean animal cages. And it was so satisfying to be able to do something and have an impact on these people's lives that, I guess I sort of got hooked and wanted to do things and change things.
It's such an interesting story on how those experiences affected you in terms of things that weren't typically part of the curriculum, right?
Right.
It's the environment that And I do think these 4-year residential, and they're almost all residential programs, one of the values of them, I mean, there are many pros and cons of that kind of education, but one of the values is you live on the campus with the students and with the faculty for basically 4 years. And it's that living experience, as you said, having that experience with another student that is so critical. Not that that doesn't happen in bigger
Well,
institutions. It
yeah,
does. But
yes.
often it's that small residential kind of environment that I think inculcates many values. So, it's an interesting form of education that goes far beyond the classroom.
Well, it does. But one of the other things I wanted to add that I've been for the last 20 or 30 years that I've observed, at least in the U.S. in higher education, is that, well, first of all, we are blessed with having many different kinds of institutions. We have small, big, public, private, religious, non-religious. I mean, a huge array. This gives students in our country enormous choice. Some students want a bigger university, some want small, some want religious. That's all very, very good. But what I've seen at the large research universities in the last few decades is a real attempt to address this problem of being so large and then finding ways to make the big university smaller with affinity groups, with breaking students into groups where they may live in residence halls that have themes. They can pursue so many different areas of study. And the advantage of a big place is that we'll have a much broader a range of subjects to study than a small liberal arts college will have. So for some students, it's like a candy store. I mean, I can do anything I want to do, and that's great for some. So what I am so happy about is, first of all, in our country, in the U.S., that we have this enormous range, that universities are now the large ones are becoming more and more attuned to the fact that they need to make ways for students to make connections almost immediately when they come into the institution, and so that students can experience graduate student instructors who are often very, very good teachers and spend a lot of time at it. They can interact with faculty, and then as they get up into their junior and senior years, what they'll find is almost all their classes are quite small because the specialization then starts to take hold. I think higher education's in a pretty good place.
I think you've put your finger on it. It's the array, it's the
Yes.
choice that distinguishes the U.S. from so many other jurisdictions, I think. And that really has benefited the country enormously when you look at how it's proceeded on all fronts in terms of how education has been such a foundation. Well, moving right along, there's been a lot written about the fact that you were the first, and to date, the only woman to serve as president at the University of Michigan. And what I find even more interesting is that following your first appointment as one of the country's finest presidents, I mean, you were to be named by Time as one of the 10 top presidents in the United States. That's incredible. So following that appointment, you were followed by a male, Mark Schlissel, who was then terminated for an inappropriate relationship with a U of M employee. And then, upon completion of your term as interim president, you were followed by another male president, Santa Ono, who recently resigned a bit under a cloud after only 2.5 years on the job. I can't imagine what you've thought about all of that, but have you reflected on the fact that your most 2 successful terms were sandwiched between 2 what I would call failed male presidencies? Does this tell us something about gender, or is it just about you as an individual? But do you believe there is a tangible difference in how women lead versus men? And I think most important, what have we learned, if anything, from the U of M experience? I mean, the eyes are on Michigan right now. What's going to happen? Who are they going to appoint? How are they going to attract an outstanding president? And if you were advising the Board of Regents, what would you tell them to be looking for to lead Michigan, this incredible institution, into the next decade? We probably need the leadership of a Michigan more than ever. So what should they be looking for?
Well, you're correct. I was the 13th president of Michigan and also the 15th as an interim. And between Iowa in Michigan. I was a university president for 20 years. But when I reflect back on my now 60-year journey in higher education, I've observed and I've experienced many different kinds of leaders, both men and women. And I really firmly believe that rather than gender stereotypes, which I do reject, that colleges and universities at different times in their journeys and histories, that they may need different kinds of qualities as president. And let me just take some extreme examples. So for an institution that might be in pretty dire financial circumstances, maybe what they need at that time is a president who could really come in and figure out ways to generate new revenue or to cut costs. I mean, that's going to be the principal thing that institution really needs. On the other hand, what if you have a really wealthy college and they may need to have a president who can be very creative about expanding opportunities for students that can only be met with a lot of financial aid for the students? I really don't believe that there are inherent differences between men and women in their leadership roles. I've sort of observed too much to believe that. So I really think that there's more variation within women leaders and men leaders as groups than there are between the two. So, I'll start at that. And I think that the importance of an institution looking for a leader is for the board, because that's the most important job that a board does. The governing board is appointing the president of the institution. They really need to sort of inform themselves about what it is that the institution needs at the time and look for those qualities. If I were asked to give advice, my advice to them would be confidential. So I'm not trying to reject your question, but I really feel quite strongly about that introspection is required, and I have tremendous confidence in the faculty who are going to be involved in this search. And, I expect them all to take it very seriously and do the right thing, and I think they will.
Mary Sue, your observations really ring true, because when I was being recruited to the University of Alberta to be president, having been at University of British Columbia all my life, I went there to graduate study and was there and never thought I'd ever go anywhere. At the same time, there were other universities who were looking, and University of Toronto's presidency was also up. And I remember a very dear friend of mine saying to me, go to U of A because it is the right fit. And what she meant by that, it was a younger university, very engineering oriented, much more suited to my background, much more frontier mentality than U of T. And I don't think U of T would have hired me anyway, but let's assume even if they had, a very, 200-year-old institution with much greater complexity than I could have managed, perhaps, and so on and so on. So I think this notion of fit, and I think the big challenge facing boards of governors, boards of regents, is that they just don't know how to assess that.
Well, I actually believe that what you've touched on an important point, and that is faculty. At least the way Michigan does it, there will be a faculty advisory committee on the search. And I expect those individuals are very important. They need to identify individuals because they know the institution, and that they need to sort of identify people who they believe will be able to manage the complexity of the institution, because, certainly the University of Michigan is a very complex place and very large. So I have a lot of confidence. I think this is an opportunity for the institution, and I'm looking forward to a successful search.
So as a follow-up question, there was a Forbes article where you were featured that suggested a leader's legacy is more than big accomplishments. While it recounts all of your accomplishments, including upgrading of dormitories, increase in student financial aid, fundraising success, enhancement of research, it suggests that what you are truly remembered for most is your personal touch. At your farewell event, people shared all the times you interacted personally with them, acknowledging who they were and how you included them in your daily endeavors. The article continues by saying that while a leader's legacy is the sum of the good and the bad, leaders are most remembered for the little things that they do. What the leader does to make the lives of others better, the way they listen or demonstrate patience or just smile. How do you respond to this assessment of your leadership record? And has this article captured Mary Sue Coleman as a leader And how do you balance this personal approach to leadership with your job of accomplishing very tough things required to move the institution forward?
Well, thank you for reminding me about the Forbes article because I had completely forgotten about it. In fact, I had to get my research assistant to go look it up for me so that I could see what they actually said. For 2014, when I first retired, seems like a long time ago, and it has been a long time. But I want to agree that I have practiced the art of listening more than I speak for nearly all of my professional life. I've also reaching out to individuals and to communities who may feel like that they are unappreciated or ignored. And I want to give you a couple of examples. When my husband and I first moved to Ann Arbor, we attended religious services at many different churches, ranging from AME, the African American Methodist churches, to Lutheran. We're not religious ourselves, but we thought that this would be a really good way to understand our new community. And it was a good way. I mean, we really did learn from it. Also, early in my tenure, a student group, legitimate student group at Michigan, invited an incendiary speaker to campus who advocated suicide bombing as an effective tool for Palestinian resistance. Our regents were in an uproar about this individual speaking on the campus and wanted me to cancel the speech. I spent 2 weeks of my life early in my tenure at Michigan seeking out both Arab and Jewish leaders, donors, and students to explain that I couldn't do that because we were being tested about our commitment to free speech that we might not like, but that didn't matter. If we were going to be a free speech community, then we had to be willing to invite speech that we didn't agree with and that we didn't like. The speech was held without incident, and I think it was a very good lesson for our community and for our board. I also developed a decision matrix that was enormously helpful all during my tenure. When I had a difficult and perhaps unpopular decision to make, the first thing I did was to consult with the community that was going to be affected. I really didn't care what people thought who were not in the community that was going to be affected. I wanted the affected people to tell me what they thought about it. I would explain the issue, I would explain the options, and I would listen to them. Then, after thorough consideration, pros and cons, I made the decision, but then I went back with another step and explained to everybody why I made the decision. And what I learned from that is that even though one group might be disappointed, they appreciated the fact that I talked to them, that I listened to them, and that I explained to them my rationale. That strategy has served me so well throughout my entire career. The third thing that I did was to hire vice presidents, those who were going to report directly to me, I thought were better than I was. So I wanted the best people, even the people who would be willing to disagree with me and tell me I was wrong, because I benefited enormously from vice presidents who said, Mary Sue, you're making the wrong decision. You need to go rethink it. I was really proud. I had 10 direct reports. 5 of them were women, not including me, and 5 men. And that group, from disparate backgrounds, different thoughts, served me enormously well.
You know, Mary Sue, I agree with your third point. Totally. I appointed the best vice president of research in the country. And my only regret is that she left. This is the problem when you appoint really good people and you want them to stay, they just fly off. But it's an affirmation of how smart you were in appointing these brilliant people.
Well, you're right. I used to lose provosts left and right.
Exactly. I mean, you worry if you appoint great vice presidents who are never called. Well, that is a wonderful list of kind of your 3 things. And, you know, I think the first of listening, it is such a hard thing to do for those of us who are A-personalities, right? And it does have to be an active, thoughtful, very specific task. You have to force yourself, and not just to stay quiet, but to truly listen, to really hear what the other person is saying. I just read a book called The Amen Effect. It's written by, I can't remember her name, but she's a rabbi in Los Angeles. And one of her rules of life is listen. Not just listen, but hear what somebody is really telling you. And it's hard work. It's hard work. And I think your idea of bringing people into the tent and listening and respecting their views, regardless of whether you agree with them or not. You've respected their views. And then to go back to them. That is brilliant. I wish I had heard this podcast, 20 years ago. Anyway, to move along.
Yeah.
Mary Sue, I grew up in a quote-unquote Michigan family. If you can believe it, in Ohio. That was a fate worse than death. My grandfather, my father, my mother, I have 2 aunts who were graduates. And then my brother and now I have a nephew, are alumni as well. As you can only imagine, I don't think Indira really appreciates being a Michigan person. Not only did I hear about the academic excellence of the university, but I was inundated, as you can believe, throughout my childhood about the Wolverines, the rivalry with Ohio State, and the infamous slogan, "Go Blue." And yet, when I was an undergraduate, and in those days, our tuition gave us free football tickets. I really did not enjoy going to the big house for the home football games that seat over 100,001 or follow the season's record with any interest. It's not that I didn't like football, and I still like football, but it didn't really appeal to me. Now, having watched how the football enterprise plays such an important role and dominating role in so many of our outstanding universities, I'm fascinated to explore how you balanced what I would call the athletic obsession of Michigan people with the university's quest for academic excellence. At first blush, these two objectives would appear to conflict with each other. And in some schools, it appears that they do. They're either known for their academic excellence, and they have terrible football teams that hardly draw crowds, or they're a big football powerhouse and their academic excellence is questionable. But what do you see as the pros and cons of having to deal with the support of a winning football team and all that entails? And there's a lot of controversy, paying players and the cost of the coaches and all of that, with the overarching goal of achieving global academic excellence. I think Michigan is unique. It appears to be one of the only universities able to do both. But I'm curious what you, as president, perceive to be the challenges of such an assignment.
Well, I'll start out by saying the University of Michigan has a very interesting culture. And that culture, about the people who inhabit this university, is that everything they do, they want it to be excellent. They want to be excellent in academics, they want to be excellent in athletics, and they don't see those two in conflict. They celebrate both the academic achievements and the athletic achievements of students, not only in football, but sort of in all sports. I mean, this is a very interesting environment. But my approach to this at both Iowa and at Michigan was to hire excellent ADs and hold them accountable. Let them do their job. I didn't try to do their job for them, but they had to be accountable to the rules governing NCAA sports. What I also did is I got into the habit of whenever we read about another school that had violated some NCAA rule, I would call up my AD right away and say, tell me why this can't happen at Michigan. So it was the trust but verify sort of approach that I took. And I was fortunate because I had ADs who exhibited great integrity and great courage about all the issues that they confronted. The other thing, though, that I did, and you may not remember this, but when I came to Michigan, there had been a lingering, unresolved case about wrongdoing in basketball in what's called the Fab Five. Okay, that actually came to a head, that issue came to a head when I first became president. And it was confirmed that the University of Michigan had violated the rules 10 years before I came, and all the people who were part of the rules violation had left the institution. So what were we going to do? Well, I decided to get up and with a bank of national cameras in front of me when this finding came out. And I said, this is a day of great shame for the University of Michigan. There were people who got angry at me for saying that, but it was true. It was a day of great shame that we had been in the wrong. We had broken the rules. And I thought I needed to be honest about it. But while there were some people upset, most people were happy that I had made that admission, and we got punished for it. And it probably set us back in basketball by a decade. But we had to do that. I mean, we couldn't just pretend that this hadn't happened. And so I guess I felt like that was right thing to do at the time. I wouldn't have done it any differently today. But I also believe deeply in the positive power of intercollegiate athletics that support the objectives of the University of Michigan. In fact, one of the ways I characterize Saturdays in the fall, it's 110,000 people, Martha, in the stadium rather than
Really?
101. And
I have been misquoting it.
Well, you have. And I always refer to this as the gathering of the clan, because that's what it is. It's the people who love Michigan, whether they are alums or not, and they come to celebrate. And if we lose, okay, too bad, we lose. It just isn't the kind of atmosphere where athletics is the be-all and the end-all. Athletics is important. And people are proud if we do well. They're proud if our softball team wins the national championship. They're proud of our Olympic sports. They're proud of so many things that happen. But they also don't, think it's the end of the world if we lose a game. And I like that. But I want to go on to say that I'm quite disturbed about the recent developments with NIL, with pay for play for athletes, with unrestricted transfer among schools. I mean, it is just getting, I think, very difficult with financial incentives for students to leave one school and go to another. I'm really worried and not optimistic about the future, because I can envision a day when the revenue sports at universities like Michigan will sort of cleave themselves from the institution, become affiliated organizations like alumni associations in many places, rent back facilities, rent the mark or pay for the mark for the institution, and just become affiliated entities in the revenue sports. I think the non-revenue sports will stay within the university environment. I think that's a pretty bleak future, the way I think about it. And I hope it doesn't happen. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe some sanity will be returned. But now it's hard to develop allegiance for a team because the players are different every year because they transfer at will. They're getting paid to play, and if they don't like what they're getting paid and somebody else will pay them more, then they'll leave. It's too much like a pro environment, and I'm sad about that.
Wow. You have such an interesting perspective. I think that somebody should hire you to look at this whole thing and come up with an answer, because it does seem to be the tail is wagging the dog. As I said, I grew up in a Michigan, just to give Indira a bit of background, I grew up in a Michigan family that was just so Michigan. And I love, Mary Sue, I love your saying they wanted to be excellent at everything. And I thought that's the first time I've heard that. And it really helps me understand the culture. But just to give you a perspective, my aunt, this is my father's sister. My father went to Michigan. My aunt went to Michigan. When she passed away, at her funeral, she played Hail to the Victors.
Oh, yeah. That's very common.
Seriously.
No, it's true. It's true.
I mean, this tells you something about the culture that is unique, I think, to Michigan. I hope your prophecy of gloom is not true. But it seems to me we need some strong voices helping us understand what the perils are out there that are lurking.
Great insights. So, from one potentially controversial subject to another, I can't imagine what it's like, and I suspect you can't, leading public research universities in today's climate. It's got to be one of the most difficult leadership positions in society. And the attack on universities from the current administration, I mean, goodness me, it's real, it's concerning, including the dismantling of DI programs, the attack on affirmative action, the concerns surrounding anti-Semitism, the defunding of research, and the potential erosion of academic freedom, to name a few, all coupled with the withholding of federal funding as a tool of leverage. It's just such a troubling time. And your article that you wrote several months ago entitled, "What's Going to Happen to Science?", where you decried the withholding of the funding for indirect costs of research, was an important, if I call, clarion call. So what advice, if any, do you have for our listeners today on how we should confront these assaults and intrusions into our collegial governance? If you were the president of U of M, how might you deal with these growing concerns about the infringement on the independence of universities?
Well, I often think about one of our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, and establishment of the University of Virginia, when basically his thesis was that it's important to democracy that we have an educated citizenry, because without that, we're going to lose our most treasured rights that we have. And so I'm quite concerned. The U.S., you know, became a global powerhouse after World War II with all the investment that was put into research and innovation. And that's all at risk now. And I hope that more of our citizens will begin to understand that, this will affect their health. It will affect their ability to have new innovations. It will affect a lot of things in their lives. And so I think it's important for those of us who can to speak up and defend higher education. I am involved with a number of groups doing that in various ways, and I hope that many of our alumni will begin. We have vast numbers of alumni in this country, and I would hope that alumni associations, I've suggested this, beginning to get together and give simple messages to their alumni of why it's so important for them to speak up and defend, because they can say what unfettered higher education, independent higher education has done for their lives. I mean, we don't to answer to a federal Department of Education. We're independent, we're different, we do wonderful things. Part of this complexity of this vast array of institutions results from the fact that we're independent. And that's extraordinarily important. So I am part of this. I know a number of other former presidents are a part of these efforts. We're all encouraging people to step forward, and particularly our alumni associations, because I think they could be extraordinarily effective.
Mary Sue, I recently had dinner with the president of McGill out of Montreal,
Yes.
and the Quebec government has put some challenges out there for its universities. And he gave the same message you gave, which is an interesting one. He was rallying alumni. He was saying alumni, the citizenry, the voters need to speak out. It's one thing for the university to speak out. It's one thing for the leaders of the university to speak out. It's one thing for past presidents to speak out. But what really has to happen is the citizenry needs to speak out. And those who are educated by the institutions that are being attacked need to speak out. And I hadn't thought of it. And both you and he have said that. And I think, if we could rally all the alumni associations right across North America, that could be very powerful.
Yes.
Because we follow it very closely. We understand. But part of people's lives are busy and they click onto one or two problems, but not always the same problems. And part of it would be educating our alumni, and the other would be rallying them. I think it's a wonderful suggestion.
We have to keep at it.
We do. So in closing, I think we want to cheer your accomplishments as a woman leader, and thank you. Thank you enormously for serving as an exemplary role model as the first woman to assume the helm of the University of Michigan. And I must tell you, when your appointment was announced, and I've been in Canada for over 50 years, I was so excited as an alumni. I was so excited. And it's been such a privilege to have this opportunity to hear from you and get to know you a little bit. But this was an accomplishment worth celebrating by all women and men, your leadership. Well done. But as Michelle Obama once said, and I quote her, "You may be the first, but be sure you are not the last." What do you see as your responsibility as a woman trailblazer to ensure that other women follow you as a leader?
So when I first joined the Big Ten in 1995 as president of the University of Iowa, there were very few women in this leadership role. In fact, Anna Gray and Donna Shalalo, they were really the trailblazers in the big research university environment. Fast forward, though, to 2025, and there are many, many more female presidents, provosts, and deans, because those other two positions are really important in people who ascend to the presidency in all types of higher education institutions. And I've mentored many of those people. So what I really do celebrate now is the expansion of opportunities for both women and men, because underrepresented men have many more opportunities to come into institutions as well as many women. And I really believe now that the pipelines are so robust and talent is so widespread that progress will continue. And I see momentum every year, evidence of that. And so I am actually quite optimistic about the future.
So, Mary Sue, we
Mhm.
really admire you. It's been just wonderful for me to finally meet you. The role you've played in advancing women in academia at so many levels in various administrative roles has been just remarkable. Your stories serve as an inspiration for thousands of women and men in leadership roles. So, thank you.
You know, we all take pride in your accomplishments. You know, it's hard not to celebrate someone like yourself who's made such an impact on higher education, while we've all kind of watched and hoped that we could even think of emulating what you've done. And listening to you today, with the wisdom you bring, I certainly hope you're out there coaching and helping and assisting, because I can tell you, I would have really, really benefited from the advice and experiences that you've had. So it's been such a pleasure, and we can't thank you enough for giving of your time and your voice, sharing with us all of your personal experiences. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Martha, and thank you, Indira. It's been a really fun conversation.
Wow. It's easy to see why she's been extraordinary as the president of University of Michigan, and just her thoughtfulness and deep understanding, I think, come through in her answers, whether it was how she approached decision making, going to the community first, going back, explaining why she made that decision, and embracing, community writ large, including going to religious services. I would have never thought about that, right? To just understand the place that she was going to. I thought that was extremely revealing.
You know, absolutely. I was taken with her description because I have really struggled with this whole balance of athletic excellence and academic excellence, with her understanding of the culture of that institution, which I had never really quite gotten my head around, which is excellence prevails at every level.
Mm-hmm.
And people are very committed to excellence wherever it resides. That was a real eye-opener for me. Anyway, as you say, we now know, just after 45 minutes of speaking with her, what an extraordinary leader she is.
Yeah. In closing, we want to thank you again for listening to this episode of She's Got Nerve. If you enjoyed tuning in, then please leave us a review on Apple's podcasts of Spotify and share this conversation with your friends.
Go to www.nerve2021.com or follow our social media channels at NerveBook 2021. Find out more about women in leadership and to access some useful resources.
And if there are specific topics you would like us to cover in the future, then please email nervebook2021@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you.
Special thanks to our team, marketing manager and producer Orla Mackerline and show manager Eilish Courtney.